me tell you a little bit about what we're going to do tonight. We're going to stick to 1 hour. We're putting Dave Dodson in the hot seat tonight, and once a month we're going to have a different hot seat. If when we send out our notices, if you think of anybody who might be interesting to hear, let me know. If you think of anybody who'd be interested in hearing the talks, let us know on that too. So the idea of our Talk2Lee event is really to get to know someone who's local, who's having an influence on our community, has some information regarding real estate, and to have a little bit of fun. So, and to meet a lot of people. Let me add that. Tonight is about friendshipping too. So tonight we're going to focus on some questions that I have laid out for Dave. We are going to get about 40 minutes into this, and I want to turn over some questions that you might have. Dave said he's willing to answer the hard questions. I may pose a couple, but you guys can pose them too. Dave Dodson, thank you for coming.
You bet, Lee.
All right.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about Dave. Dave graduated from OSU with a Bachelors of Science in Liberal Studies and went on to get a Master's of Landscape Architectural from California State Polytechnic University.
Couple like the one.
All right, good. Early in his career, he worked with an international architectural engineering firm based out of Houston, designing overseas embassies, campus master plans, and corporate headquarters for Chrysler, 3M, IBM, and Shell Oil. He moved to Corvallis 20 years ago, where he worked in the city's planning department, processing land use applications, overseeing the city's historic preservation program, updating the 2020 vision statement, and the comprehensive plan. He left the city after 6 years and started Willamette Valley Planning, a firm that provided consulting services such as land use planning, landscape architecture, and preparation of development applications. He's worked on a number of contentious projects, including the Whiteside Theater, the new Corvallis High School, and numerous annexations. For the past 4 years, Dave has worked for OSU, and he currently serves as the campus planning manager. So my first question to Dave is, can you share what you see as the trend for OSU growth in students and faculty?
Sure.
All right.
So first off, kind of a clarifying point. There's a lot of numbers get thrown out that people hear. You might hear like around student population on campuses is 24,000. You might hear it's 28,000. Oftentimes the numbers that you hear include both full-time students that are the head count at OSU here in Corvallis. Oftentimes it also includes the head count at our Cascade campus in Bend, which is close to 1,000. It also includes eCampus, which is actually more significant yet. And it also includes the Marine Hatfield Science Center over in Newport as well. So that's, if you hear the 28,000 or so, that is all of those numbers included. What we look for when we do planning here on campus in Corvallis is we look at the head count on campus, so the number of actual physical bodies and students that are on campus. And right now that number is just over 24,000. The trending, if you look back in the last 10 or 15 years, we had some of our highest growth rates in terms of increase in enrollment was about 2010 and 2011. We tracked at about 8% enrollment growth those 2 years. It has since been tapering off. So part of that is a result of the recession. Obviously people or students have a difficult time, not even students, just high school grads have a hard time finding a job, or they realize they might have some better prospects going to school. It's a pretty typical trend, whether it's a war, whether it's a recession, those kinds of things. There's surges at the universities, at those institutions where people go. But this past year we had growth of about around 4%. This next year we anticipate the enrollment growth to be about 3%. Following year it'll be 2%, and it tapers down over about the next 6 years to about 0. So by 2020, we envision that the enrollment's going to taper off probably somewhere between 27,500 and 28,000. And that's close to being in alignment with what President Ed Ray has indicated of trying to set a cap of about 28,000 here at the OSU campus.
Awesome. And how has that affected faculty growth?
Faculty growth has grown. If you look at the numbers, the fluctuation varies. It's been between about 110 and 140 additional faculty each year, and that faculty includes professional faculty, which are professors. It includes our administrative assistants and things like that, folks that are working there, and even part-time as well. But we envision that that probably faculty increases we're going to see somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2%. So probably just over 100 a year is what we're looking at. And again, as we start to as we see that curve line kind of flatten out, I suspect that we'll see a compensating flattening on the hiring as well.
So a question I've never asked, but I'm interested in is how many employees are there on campus, approximately?
It's about 5,800.
Wow.
Yeah, full-time employees.
Good number. Do you believe that Corvallis and OSU are doing enough to satisfy the housing needs for the growth that's going on?
There's a couple answers to that. I think the first of which is it kind of depends on one's philosophy on who's obligated to provide the housing. In the past, OSU has typically housed mostly freshmen. And the reason being is that particular class is probably the most vulnerable. And what I mean by that is they're fresh out of high school, it's a whole new experience, they're on their own. There's definitely a need to ensure that there's management of the students that are there, and it's much better to have them on campus in somewhat of a controlled environment with residence assistants and things like that to oversee what's going on, what's happening on campus, as opposed to out in the community, hooping it up and live in this new freedom that they have. Mm-hmm. And so typically we have housed anywhere between probably 65 and 70% of the full-term freshmen on campus. Has been in the past. And the trend, and if you look at the trends, it drops off significantly. So freshmen, we house, like I said, now we house probably closer to 75% of those. In fact, it was a mandate last year by President Ray to house all full-term freshmen on campus. So that number's going up a little bit more even. I think the sophomores we house, it's about 11% of the sophomore class still chooses to live on campus. Then it tapers off dramatically, the juniors and the seniors. In fact, I think I take that back. The 11% is actually international students. So with the Into program, again, because they're coming overseas, and we offer the programs during the summer months as well, that's our next highest on-campus housing kind of group is international students. So about 11% international. The sophomore is 6%. The junior senior goes down to like 3, 4, and then graduate students it's less than 1%. So it's not much there. So that's what OSU has done traditionally for housing on campus. For those of you familiar with the City OSU collaboration efforts, there has been a desire or an interest in seeing if OSU can provide some additional housing on campus, because what has happened is with OSU just targeting that market of freshmen and all the other students, especially with the enrollment increases, have put pressure on the community and surrounding communities for providing that housing if OSU is not providing it. So what's happened is you've seen some projects that have been targeted specifically for students, one of which is being built right now out by 35th and Western with 1,000 beds. You've also seen a lot of infill, so neighborhoods where existing dwellings that have been torn down and then replaced with usually oftentimes higher density that's targeted again for the students. So you'll see a single family 2 or 3 bedroom old house gets torn down, and in its place is 2 5-bedroom duplexes, gets placed in there because of the zoning and things like that. And that's created some problems for those people in those existing neighborhoods. They thought they had mostly lived in a single family neighborhood, and although that may be what's there, if the zoning allows for something different, some folks have taken a look at taking advantages of that opportunity. So it really boils down to, I think, the question of, well, should the private market, provide the housing, which is one opportunity, or should OSU provide most of that, or should there be some kind of balance in between where OSU provides some and the private sector provides the rest? I know that as part of our efforts as we look at updating our master plan, which by the way is now being called the district plan for OSU, because we have a 10-year plan that is good for 10 years. It expires at the end of 2015, the end of next year. So we're in the throes right now of updating and creating a new plan for the next 10-year planning horizon, which will be 2015 to 2025. So as we do that, we are looking at seeing what we can accommodate as part of the recommendation that has come out of the collaboration effort. And that they've suggested there to look at increasing the amount of housing on campus to closer to 28 to 30% of the campus population. So that would be a pretty significant increase. Because of how we do housing on campus and the cost per square foot is very high, so it's not market rate, we'll probably be looking at doing some sort of public-private partnership, again with another housing provider, doing a deal where we'll probably lease the land to them, and then there'll be some kind of co-management. They might do the construction, something like that, to provide some additional housing on campus. There's also a number of projects that are in the pipeline right now. So the old Sather properties I had mentioned, that's 1,000 beds. Witham Oaks was approved, although it's under appeal. That's another 900 beds out off of Harrison Boulevard across from the dairy barns. There's another one that has been submitted by Core Campus. It's another student housing developer up in Timber Hill, so just up behind the Timber Hill, athletic club and all that. That's another 900 beds. They're looking at doing there. The only other one that's of size anyways is the old GT building. And there are some plans for that. It would be about 120 beds, like about 29 or 30 units. But that's right now is kind of on hold because those developers are tied up with, they're putting their money into some other projects in Eugene and some other parts of town. So that might be a year before something happens there. So I can't answer the question as to really what's best. I think that it's a combination of the two, probably, where OSU steps up to look at providing, and what it would be, not so much freshmen, because we have the housing for freshmen now. We just opened a new dorm. We did close the co-ops, and that was just over 200 beds there, but we brought online another 320 beds with the new residence hall, and we opened another floor in one of the residence halls that was closed previously, so there's another 80 to 100 beds that will be coming online, net increase on campus. And then, I'm trying to think, lastly, yeah, that's it. So again, I think it's probably going to be a combination of OSU looking at providing more market rate housing, so not so much the dormitory style. There's a real push to get away for like the gang bathrooms and all. It's really not a desirable situation, so the new dorm has more private baths associated with the suites and the rooms. And we'll probably look at, if we do something on OSU's campus, we're doing, again, something that you would see that's more in line with what's happening with what I would call the student housing apartment complexes that are being built out there. So something that would be, there'd be a common, rec room, Wi-Fi center, whatever it's going to be. Maybe even some amenities, could be, pools and some things like that, hard to say. So we'll know as we get into that. We're in the process right now, at least housing is in the process of doing some, sending out an RFP to do a study to find out what the market might be like for that before we engage, in a relationship with the developer to do that.
Awesome. So as a follow-up to a couple things you said, I found this interesting, and you shared this with me once. Talk a little bit about how you guys develop a 10-year plan, and then the requirements either to stick to that, because the rest of us we take our plan to the city for a house, a remodel, or whatever it is, and it is approved or not approved or whatever it is. At one point you kind of described to me how OSU is constantly updating its plan, and then that's what you work from. Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, what I'll share is that we all, as planners, we have good intentions. And we like to think that we really know how to plan, and oftentimes we do, sometimes we don't, but really the planning horizon ends up being realistic. It's really only a couple of years out. That's all we can really have, at least a tangible idea on what's really going to happen. And then beyond that, it's all speculation. So if you're shooting this way, and yet everything drifts this way, the further you get out from that first year you do it, the more you get skewed. And that's really noticeable for us when we did some transportation modeling. So we did some transportation modeling which had some initial inputs and assumptions, and that was done 9 years ago. And so now, since that time, it's so skewed, to be honest with you, it's really of no value anymore. So we spent a lot of money developing this model only to find that, well, after about 5 or 6 years, it's really not worth it. You're much better off just doing, current, traffic counts and things like that to see what's on the ground and what's really real and what's happening. What we do at OSU is, again, we try to plan, we do things differently, and we're not the only one in town. So Samaritan Health, the hospital, also has a master plan as well. And why they do that and why we do that is because there's oftentimes, and first off, we're the property owner, you know, and we're the developer. So we're going to be here for a long time. Samaritan, same thing there. They're not like coming to town, they're going to do a subdivision and leave. You know, it's a little different situation. So we really have a vested interest in the long-range planning. But we also know that, I'll give you an example, like with Kelly Engineering, for those of you who were around 10 years ago, when Kelly Engineering went before the Planning Commission, which when there wasn't a campus master plan, every new construction project had to go before the Planning Commission for consideration and approval. Well, what happened with that one was somebody that wasn't happy with it decided to appeal. And what happens at OSU is oftentimes we have a donor that will step up and offer a major contribution towards a new building. And if they realize that, you know, sometimes these folks are elderly and they want to see something come out of the ground while they're still alive. And what happens is if this thing gets tied up in an appeal process and it goes on and on and on, oftentimes they'll pull out. They'll say, you know what, I would much rather see my money go to work somewhere else, and I don't have the time to wait around and see what the outcome is here. And so we lose millions of dollars just because of the process. So what we try to do is to do the long-range planning, not that we're trying to circumvent or skate out of the obligations, because we know that anytime development occurs, there are impacts that need to be mitigated. You know, whether it's road improvements, whether it's parking, whether it is, you know, new infrastructure, you know, open space, all those things. And so what we try to do is we try to build that into the plan so that we say, okay, there's going to be this much development, here's where it's likely going to be, here are the impacts, and here are the changes here are the things we're going to do to help mitigate those impacts. And we'd like to get your approval for that 10-year plan to give us that opportunity to do it and not be subject to going before, you know, a decision-making body where we run the risk of getting tied up in court or appeal or something like that.
Gotcha. Awesome.
And that has really, I'd say that the master plan has really been helpful to us. So the hospital and us, interestingly enough, they have, I think, just submitted their new plan. So their plan is kind of expired too, or actually they've built as much as they can up there, and so they've now gone back to the city with their new plan to say, here's our 10-year planning, or whatever their horizon is, I'm not sure. And then again, we're in the throes of looking at you know, doing our 10-year plan.
Awesome. So as a follow-up then, what are some of the exciting new projects coming up for OSU? New buildings or things we might see in the next 3 to 5 years that you're aware of now?
Yeah, it's interesting. In the last 5 years, we will open 16 new buildings on campus.
Wow.
Some of them are fairly substantial, big buildings. Of those 16, 8 of them are opening this year. So for those of you who have been up on campus or seen what's going on, it is a mess. Whether it's the roads that are closed for new construction, the buildings that are coming out of the ground, there's a lot going on. Interestingly enough, most of that stuff was in the pipeline, it's being pushed through the pipeline, and after that, there's really not much. So again, that surge in development is a real peak. In fact, if you look back at the development across campus, the most buildings we've ever opened in the history of OSU is 4 buildings in 1 year. And like I said, this year we're opening 8 buildings. So that's unprecedented for OSU. Might not ever happen again for all I know. It's really something. So that's a huge impact. But that big blip is going to be followed by a drop. So I suspect the following year, next year, we're going to be opening the classroom building, which is a big building. And then...
Where's that at?
That is right behind the women's building, in the women's building field there, where the new business building is being constructed. So there's a cultural center and a business building being constructed there. But most of the other buildings, it's our hope that all those other ones will be open. So the ones that are coming online soon, first off is a new residence hall, 320 beds over by McNary. That is going to be open this fall. Austin Hall, which is a new business building, which is located, just kind of to the west down by some other residence halls down there, the West Dining Hall. That will open this fall as well. The Student Experience Center, which is located where the old MU parking lot was, where many people parked to go to the bookstore, which is that parking lot's gone, and so there's a building there now. That will open essentially Christmas, or right around the Christmas break is when that'll be open. There are a number of cultural centers. The Asian Pacific Cultural Center is being constructed right now. The Native American Cultural Center is already up. and operational. The Cesar Chavez Cultural Center is open as well. The Black Cultural Center, there was some underground mess from an old gas station nearby, and so we're still having to do some additional stuff, so there's not much activity on there until we get that figured out and resolved. But we have plans and everything, it's approved, it's ready to go. We just got to get that figured out, how we can deal with it. And then, like I said, the classroom building will be coming online after that. The other couple projects that are kind of in the pipeline, but still a ways out, one is Johnson Hall, which is over by Kelly Engineering. It's the, what is it, the Chemical and Biological Engineering building. So there's a real relationship between Kelly and it. And that will be under construction starting February of next year. There's also a materials testing building that will probably go in out by the Hinsdale Wave Lab is another building. And there's a few others that are kind of conceptual, but they haven't been finalized yet. Most of the funds that are targeted for improvements at OSU are now going to be directed into the existing buildings. So we have a number of the buildings are over 60 years old, more than half on campus. And the problem is you go inside and they look like they're there for 60 years. So they don't have the current upgrades that they need, whether it's electrical, data, all that stuff, heating and ventilation systems, and all that. They're just grossly behind. And so now that we have all these new buildings on campus, it's important that we bring those other ones up to speed to make them useful. And again, we do a lot of research on campus too, and some of those environments are very sensitive in terms of what the climate needs to be like inside, the assurance that you've got good power supply and those kinds of things. And in some of those older buildings, it's not there. So I think many of the dollars that are going to be targeted towards construction are going to go into rehab and upgrades of existing facilities.
So OSU has purchased quite a few buildings around town. What are those buildings being used for?
Different things, but primarily for those uses on campus that require a lot of space, is what I would say. So we have, I think it's Team Oregon in the old DMV building, and that's the kind of motorcycle training statewide that occurs down there. So they have a lot of pamphlets and they do big training and things like that. And so they're down there. CIAS, which is our the group that does a lot of the research in the ocean and things like that. They have all these various submersibles and buoys and what have you. They have a need for a lot of storage, and so they are down the old Familian building, also in that same Corvallis industrial complex down there. And OSU's acquired 3 other parcels down there as well, for looking to maybe eventually build that out again for more of those uses that don't necessarily have to be core or in the center of campus. You know, where there's a need to bring in a semi-truck to unload this stuff for these guys to repurpose some of the equipment and then to haul out the stuff to again put it back in the ocean or wherever it's going. So those types of things, which in the core of campus, we want to try and get the big trucks out of there and that type of thing. We also bought, probably 2 years ago now, the old NIPRO building. And it was hoped that through that acquisition that OSU would move our surplus property operations out to that facility. So right now it's over there off of 13th and the railroad tracks, or A Street I think it is. And it works, but it's a little bit tight, and so we were hoping to move them and maybe printing and mailing off campus to that location. We've got to put some money into repurposing that building to make it work before we do that. So right now I think it's maybe just used for storage.
As a follow-up to something you said earlier, how many students hang around town in the summertime?
You know, I don't know what the number is. I'm sure we could figure that out, but I'm not exactly sure. I'm guessing that between students going to school and then students that are also assisting, you know, as student workers. I mean, we have some in our group that we retained. I'm guessing it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 25% of the total students. This is my guess.
That's a big number.
Yeah, by the time that's up.
So, you were a private planner in a past life. Where do you see the opportunities for Corvallis these days?
Real estate opportunities.
Sure. I kind of left it open for you. You've got a lot of real estate junkies here, but you also have a lot of people who are passionate about Corvallis. So this question kind of goes to Dave's heart and soul, a little bit more
Yeah.
beyond the planner, but
So there's a few answers then. I guess first off, you know, the growth that has occurred on campus has definitely had an impact on those neighborhoods immediately surrounding campus. And I know that because I've lived in those neighborhoods, and I was one of those people who felt impacted, and I sympathize with those folks. And so I guess when I look to see what the enrollment numbers look like, and I look to see those projects that are in the pipeline as potential student housing projects, that I see an opportunity there, that if those projects do materialize and they're targeted for students, for one, it gives students more choices. So historically, you know, in the past, I'm going to say, as of about 3 years ago, we didn't have any real apartment complexes that were really targeted or geared specifically for students. You know, with the amenities for students and really just geared for student life off campus. We just didn't have that. We've got, kind of have one over there on 7th Street Station. I think that was kind of a target, but I think we'll definitely have one at the Sather properties. That's 1,000 beds. They do that for a living. They know the protocol, that type of thing. And as much as people complain about, oh, there's going to be students and there's issues, and there are issues, at least in that case, you know where to go to have a conversation with somebody, as opposed to, well, you know, the landlord's out of town, you're going to have to give him a call, here's his number, good luck, type of thing. So I think that if those other ones do come online, more of that pressure and more of those students that are living in and around those neighborhoods will have other choices to move out, and I think it'll free up some of that pressure to maybe allow, again, people who want to buy a house and live close to campus to move back into those neighborhoods. Because personally, I feel that it's the neighborhoods that have a really nice mix of individuals living there. And that includes everyone from families to young professionals to elderly to you name it. Those are the diverse neighborhoods where people get to know each other, and you know, and your neighbors that are elderly can watch your kids for a couple hours if you and your wife want to go out and have, you know, dinner or something like that. And I worry about those neighborhoods really close to campus as becoming just, you know, students only, and I don't think that's really healthy for the neighborhood. I think it's nice to have that mix of uses where people care about where they live. And I've seen people who really do care about where they live and they've given up. And I hate seeing that because you know, they have a passion, they have a real desire to make sure their neighborhood is a good place to be. And when they fought it and, you know, things were popping up around them and they just said, you know what, we're just throwing our hands up and we're leaving. I don't like seeing that. So I hopefully that'll free up some of those opportunities for reinvestment in those neighborhoods, but maybe for people who do want to be, you know, closer to either the university, closer to downtown, those types of things.
can you comment on the growth in tattoo parlors in town in the last 2 years?
No, but I'll tell you an interesting thing. I work out at Dixon Rec Center, and I sit in the hot tub, and I like to have a conversation with students to find out what's going on. Like we work on things like parking and stuff like that, and I said, how's parking for you? You know, just to find out what's going on with them and that type of thing. And I noticed that a lot of the students, especially the men, or young men, have tattoos in their chest or on their arms, and stuff like that. And so I asked the guy, I said, what's the story? I said, did you have a tattoo before you came to college? He says, no, And I said, and I asked him, I said, what percentage of your friends, you know, have tattoos? He said, oh, it's 25-30%. It's just a trend. I mean, it's just like, you know, maybe years back, you know, it was good to have long hair, to wear Birkenstocks or whatever, and so now it's just having a tattoo. So it's far more. But when I went to college, hardly anybody had tattoos. Yeah. So it's the sign of the times. No, I expect you to go across country and see that same trend. I really do. I don't think it's just Corvallis only. Yeah.
Are there any new sporting sort of complexes or facilities in the works?
No, but there are. There's plans, and so, you know, for those of you who don't know, OSU has actually not a world-renowned, but at least a very well-respected facility here. So compared to other you know, higher education institutions, we have one of the best in the country. And, you know, a few years back when we did some upgrades to some of those facilities, it's even better now. So as many of you know, we have Dixon Rec Center, which when I came to OSU had a basketball court, a weight room, and like 10 racquetball courts. And it's gone through like 4 expansions since that time. But the fields across the way were grass, and when students were here, again, the winter months, it was soggy, they weren't even allowed to play on it. And so what we did is we did what's now called Student Legacy Park, which was we redeveloped those and it's still into fields and tennis courts. But now it's synthetic turf, and so they can get out there anytime. And I tell you, the usage on that facility is unbelievable. I mean, just about every night, even if it's not, so long as it's not pouring down rain, even if it's misty or whatever else or cold, they're still out there doing stuff. You know, the lights on until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And it's just, and I think it's a real great amenity. I mean, it's right by, where a lot of the students live on campus. It's a great healthy activity, for everyone to engage in, and we have a lot of, of sports programs that we offer at OSU too. We also repurposed McAlexander Fieldhouse. So now that has, more climbing wall facilities. It's got another indoor field for something, or I'm not sure what. So there are plans in the works to do a couple of things. One is to expand Dixon to the south. There was an assessment done with the students, because again, typically, just so you know, the folks who fund those expansions for Dixon Rec is not the taxpayer that helps to do it, but who pays it back are the students through student fees. So that's how those things get built on campus. And so they went out and did a survey of the students to say, hey, would you guys like some improved facilities to do this, that, and whatever else? And they said, yeah, but we're not willing to pay for it right now. So that's somewhat, it's on hold for a little bit until there seems to be enough interest to look at expanding that. The other thing too is for some of the rec sports programs, as we build more in the core of campus, we're losing some of those fields. So the fields behind the women's building, which used to be used for rec sports, are no longer there. And so rec sports is looking to maybe eventually have some other fields, and the places that we're looking at is what we call a South Farm property, so just on the other side of Philomath Boulevard. OSU owns 50 acres over off of Brook Lane. And part of that is in the floodplain, so we can't really build buildings over there. So that portion of the floodplain would be an ideal location for putting a couple new fields.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So one more question for me before we turn it over. In your opinion, what is Corvallis missing, whether in the way of housing or business, that could better support the students who are coming to make it a more desirable place?
Yeah. And this is for the students or just in general?
Let's say both.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's been interesting to kind of watch projects that come online, and and I've been involved in some studies working with private developers about where there might be opportunities. And I've worked with Corvallis Downtown Association and folks like that. The thing that I find interesting is Tom Girding, who's building I think he's only got, for some reason, 27 rings a bell. There's like 27 units in the building he's building on First Street right across from Big River there.
Yeah.
The other day I talked to him, and this, it's not even close to being opened yet, and I think he had 50 reservations for that. And I talked to an elderly woman who I've known here for years, and she's like, hey, I'm selling my place and I'm moving in there. And I'm like, no kidding. She goes, yeah, I'm so excited. But again, we're seeing as the population gentrifies, and even though we have a lot of students here, again, there's the baby boom group. It's amazing to me how many of them want to look at simplifying. They don't want to take care of the big yard and whatever else. And they want the convenience of being able to walk to places and get some exercise, whether they're walking along the riverfront or walking to a restaurant or walking to go shop and what have you. And so I think we're seeing kind of a trend, because I asked Tom about the price. I said, well, how many of those are students? And he says, you know what, not one.
Wow.
So that was interesting to me.
And those are going to be rentals.
Those are all rentals.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was amazed that they got snatched up so much. So I think in the downtown, we have a really nice downtown. I lived in downtown. I lived on 4th Street, and I got woken up, once a week at 3:30 in the morning with a garbage truck coming down the alley and up in the dumpster and whatever else, and some other noises on occasion and things like that. But I think the more we can diversify the downtown, and especially on, I'm going to say, the professional side of living downtown, we have a lot of subsidized housing downtown, which is a certain market segment, but they're the ones that don't necessarily look out for downtown as much or spend as many dollars downtown as well. And so getting a little bit more diverse mix of people living downtown, whether it's elderly or students that are out spending money or something like that, I think would be something that I think would be a benefit to Corvallis. You know, we've always had, there's always the discussion about supply. You know, Corvallis is expensive, there's not much land to build on, that type of thing. And relatively speaking, that might be true. And it is, you know, the entry opportunity is more difficult in some communities. You go to Lebanon, you know, it's open doors, you give you a permit, no problem. Corvallis, it's like, yeah, sure, we'll let you do that, but you got to do this, you got to pay this, you got to do this study, you got to do that. You know, it's like, okay, you know, well, maybe I'll just go to Lebanon. So it's a little more difficult to do business in Corvallis. But by the same token, we set our standards higher. And so it kind of sets the bar higher because of, I think, what the community's expectations are, or at least some expectations, whoever sets those expectations. So it does become a little bit more difficult. I think that if we did, it's hard to say. If things were cheaper here, I think we'd have more people here. I think a lot of people, because of that cost factor, just get priced out in the market. And so they have to make choices about doing the commute to go elsewhere and whatever else. Yeah. We're finding, and I don't know what the numbers are like, but I know, Bob, maybe you've got some of the results from the survey that was done on housing. I think it was a transportation survey or something?
It was actually a housing survey.
Housing survey.
Just completed, so
yeah.
The results aren't even out yet.
Okay.
Just got presented to Camp like a month ago.
Okay, and I know price was one of the driving factors.
Yeah.
But again, as a planner, it sure is nice. One thing we're going to be looking at as we update the campus master plan or district plan is what can we do to promote people to either ride a bike or to walk or to think about taking the transit or something as opposed to hopping in their car. You know, oftentimes we at OSU will hear, well, if you just put more parking in on campus, it would solve the problem. And maybe to some degree, if we did free parking, it would, but I can guarantee you the streets would be a nightmare because suddenly you're promoting and encouraging everyone to drive an automobile, you know? And so Harrison Boulevard is just going to be a traffic jam, and some of the other streets along Monroe and what have you. So I think we need to be thoughtful about what is it we'd really like to see if there is going to be some growth, you know, and how we want to best management, what do we want to do to promote and encourage certain activities to happen.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, so we're going to turn it now over to the group.
Great.
And I'm hoping there are at least 2 or 3 questions. Who's going to be first? All right, Chris, thank you.
So the question was, make sure I got it right, is to what extent is the core of campus going to be car-free in the future? Yeah. Is that it, or generally speaking? You could look back 30 or 40 years in the various campus master plans that have been developed over those periods of time. And there has, for a long time, been a desire to keep the core of campus, I guess I'm going to say pedestrian friendly. So again, an area where there's not much in the way of vehicles or truck deliveries and things like that. It's a twofold reason. One is because the break between classes is 10 minutes. And so in order to get the students from class to class, ideally within a 10-minute period, they're going to either need to walk or ride a bike. Is really the only way to make that work. You can't hop in and, you know, go to a parking lot, hop in your car, drive across campus and make that work. It's just not going to happen. And so, well, over the years, there's been restrictions on vehicles going through campus. What's a real problem for us is the deliveries too. Some of those big trucks, they come in 18-wheelers and they park on Jefferson. And they park on the sidewalk and whatever else. So one of the things we're going to be looking at, seriously looking at, what we look at on the transportation plan this go around, we're going to call it access. And that's all modes of travel. So there's nothing that we're not taking out. In fact, we're even getting it down to pedestrian circulation. So we have standards for vehicle travel. You know, there's so many travel lanes and stop signs and lights and to direct people there. But we get back down to the smaller level of pedestrians with more students on campus, and a lot of those sidewalks haven't been, you know, widened in years. Is it sufficient to accommodate those students? And if not, then we come up with, so we've developed some new standards for that, and to look at where those main routes are. When we put new buildings in, like a classroom building, the new walkways we're doing to that classroom building are 12 to 15 feet wide, because we envision a lot of students and we need to accommodate that capacity, especially during those surges between class breaks. So our hope, and we'll have to see how it all plays out, our hope is to I guess I'll just say seriously restrict vehicles and delivery trucks from the core of campus during the operating hours. And in order to accommodate those deliveries and things, they might need to do them off hours, like earlier in the morning or late at night. Or there might be a central location where they drop things off and it gets shuttled in. For people with accessibility challenges, we're still going to accommodate those people with their vehicles because they need to get to those locations closer to the core of campus. But other than that, we really intend to try to really keep the core primarily for pedestrians, vehicles, any other thing. Somebody wants to rollerblade or ride a skateboard, that works too. All right, sir. So the question was that the growth rate was last year at 4%. This next year is at 3, then it goes down to 2, and then it kind of flattens out. You're asking what do I attribute that to? Yeah. I think it's a number of factors. I think the predominant one seems to be the economy. So when there were fewer jobs to be had, we found two things. One is we found students graduating from high school were more likely to consider college as opposed to going out and trying to find a job that were hard to come by. That's one thing. The other thing is those students that did get undergraduate degrees went to look for jobs and couldn't find a job. So they said, well, I can go out there and have the student loan to pay, or maybe I should stay in school for another year or two and get a master's, and then when I get out, it'll be a little bit better situation. So we found a lot of that occurring as well. So a lot more students staying on for post-undergraduate work to keep them in the system longer. I suspect too that there would probably some of that might be, I'm just going to say, more liberal loan practices. So again, a lot of students in the past that might not have been able to get a loan when there was a recession and all, the lending standards were a little more liberal, and so again, the people that weren't able to get a loan to stay in school were now able to get loans. Again, another reason for them to be in school. What's happening now is what we're seeing, I don't know about the loan stuff much, but what we're seeing is that with the economy improving, many more jobs, those students that do have an undergrad degree, if they've got a job, there's no reason to stay on to get a master's. And also, again, the number of high school students entering the system, again, are probably dropping a little bit as well. So some of that's demographics, so that there's some peaks and valleys that occur in there, but I'd say those are probably the driving forces. So it sounds like a two-part question. First off, what are the co-ops, are they going to be repurposed for any particular use? And then secondly, what's happening with the desire to have a strong connection between the downtown and OSU along Madison Ave right there? So the first part, I'll answer what I know. I think there's maybe 4 co-ops in there with just over 200 beds is what they typically had. 2 of those buildings are being repurposed for what we call the OSU food pantry. So there are actually some students on campus that need, that have a hard time, obtaining enough food to meet their dietary needs. And so we have a food pantry on campus where people that have those needs can come and get, supplemental on food stuff. There's also daycare. So part of it's a food pantry, daycare. I think there might even be a little part of that, some kind of medical assist too. And I don't know if that includes dental or exactly what, but again, some other type of, or maybe social service type thing. So 2 of those buildings are going to be repurposed for those uses. We used to have a daycare out off of Jefferson at the end back there, and that got closed. That building's been repurposed, so I think part of that is to have another. Right now we have 1 daycare center, and we have the Bates, kind of another one, a smaller one for more research, and then this will be a 3rd one on campus, but there's a strong need for that. So that's happening. I think one of the buildings too one of them might be repurposed for visiting professors. So apparently there's a need for those professors that might come here just for a month or 2 or maybe a term only, but they want a place to stay and they want to be close to campus, so repurposing that for a situation or an environment where they might be able to live there. So that's what I know about that for now. There is some work going on there this summer to repurpose at least for some of those uses that are happening. The second part of the question about the connection there, the Madison Avenue Task Force has been around here for about 25 years. It was initially a city established kind of commission, and then after a while they kind of met their mission and they sunsetted, but the group themselves felt that they really wanted to make a long-term the connection from the river all the way to campus, and so really from what we call the gates on 11th Street all the way down to 1st Street. And they started along the river for the most part, and they worked their way up through the, the Arts Center and all that. The last leg that remains to be done is really between 9th and 11th Street. And that group has developed a plan that has been called the Campus Connection, although I think it has a new name now. And what they want to do is just keep everything there, but there's a median there that has landscaping. It has St. John's Wort, it had some cherry trees, but most of them are dead. And they want to keep some landscaping there, but pave the center of that and put some benches and some historic markers, and then at either end do some gateway treatments, similar to like what, not quite as elaborate, but what we've got is 15th and Jefferson, that monument entryway where there's some brick columns with lights on top and some fencing and stuff. So there's going to be some treatments at the ends of each of those streets, 9th and 11th Street. OSU is actually committed to help fund that for a 4-year period. So that provides a fair amount of the funding. Some additional monies will need to be raised, and I know the Madison Avenue Task Force is in the process of kind of putting together a strategy for how to go out and see if they can get the rest of those monies. But the project has been designed, so they paid the city to actually design, Madison Avenue Task Force did, to do the design. So the design, from what I know, is actually completed. They just need to get enough money to make it happen. Yeah. So the question is I talked a little bit about kind of student recreation opportunities, but I didn't talk about the sports programs at OSU, like football and basketball and softball and that kind of thing. So we just built, I'm going to say it's the Wyatt Track and Field facility over there at 15th and Philomath Boulevard. It's got a red track, and it has a synthetic turf field on the inside as well. That was the first phase of that project. There's a second phase that will include some bleachers, and I think maybe a concession stand and restrooms and things like that. So that is in the works. Again, when funding is available, that will happen. There's ongoing changes and additions happening to Goss Stadium. So the new one that you will see any day now under construction will be on let's say the east wing, close to the third baseline. There's going to be a new locker room put down below, and then some seating up above, and even kind of a small hot dog concession stand on top there. So that'll provide some, no real fixed seats, but again, more informal kind of eating opportunities. And I think it provides for a locker room for one of the teams that right now doesn't have sufficient facilities. Mm-hmm. We just got through building the basketball practice facility there that's west of Gill. You'll see that if you drive along Washington Way. There's the new Samaritan Sports Medicine Institute that's going in on 30th Street. It's on the kind of the western side of the parking lot from Research Stadium. But that's more of a sports medicine facility. It'll be primarily for OSU, but also open to the public too, for sports injuries and things like that. I can't think of any other ones, but athletics is constantly looking at upgrading facilities and things like that. But I know like huge plans in the works right now for like another the next expansion at Research will happen on the kind of the southwest side, which is the older portion, and then they'll make that even better, and then visitor side will be the existing one. So that's how these things kind of grow. Right, so the question was, is there any expansion plans for Valley Football Center? We've heard about that for a while, but we've not, short of just some architectural changes, we haven't really seen any expansion plans for that.
My other main question is, has any decision been made about the future of Snell Hall?
Snell's an interesting one. So for those of you who don't know, Snell is a building that is across from the library on the south side of Jefferson, just west of the Kerr Administration Building. It's right when you go up the hill there. It's on the left side. It has some kind of blue paneling. It was done in the 60s or 70s. It's kind of dated. We have a few buildings like that on campus. There were a number of problems with water penetration on that building and also seismic issues. So the building and repurposing it like it is doesn't make financial sense. So at some point in time, that building will be torn down. However, because of the current development activity on campus and the need for space, right now that building is being used as what we call surge space. And we're still even short on campus of space because, again, when we build new buildings, you have to move somebody out, and with expanded programs and additional research that are happening on campus, we need that surge space. So we'll continue to use it as long as we need it, but when the need drops after all these new buildings open, then there may be an opportunity to take that building out and then put something in its place.
So Dave, I'm going to ask you to close with one story, if you'll share again. You once shared with me a story of your connection to the Linus Pauling building and a little health issue that you kicked.
Oh yeah.
I'm wondering if you might share that tonight.
Sure.
And finalize with that story.
So 5 years ago, when I started at OSU, I was hired as a senior planner, and about a year prior to that, OSU had established a historic district on campus. So there had been, prior to that, 12 buildings that were listed on the local historic register. So if there were any alterations or changes to those buildings, they had to go before what was then in the Historic Preservation Advisory Board. But things got a little more formalized after the city formed a couple of historic neighborhood districts. And then OSU came on and in, I'm going to say about 2007 or 2008, encompassed about 87 buildings within 180 acres of campus. So again, those buildings were typically 50 years or older. Now there happened to be buildings that also were within that boundary line that was drawn that weren't 50 years or older just because of their location, but they weren't necessarily contributing buildings, but they were considered to be within the historic district. So when the Linus Pauling Institute was proposed in Corvallis, the location that they selected was right within the boundary, right on the edge of the boundary, the western edge of the boundary, over at Campus Way and 30th Street. And my first day of work happened to be the evening where the Historic Resource Commission was making a decision on the application to build the new Linus Pauling Institute. And it was the first new building that was ever proposed within that historic district. So it was kind of a test for the city and for OSU to see how that went. So my boss at the time said, well, you should show up and we'll see how it goes. And I said, good idea, let's do it. And I had worked for the city with the historic group, and I'd also had a private practice 10 years prior to that where I worked on contentious projects where there was historic issues like the Whiteside Theater and Corvallis High School and stuff. So I was familiar with it, and I was just kind of curious how it was going to go. So I show up at the meeting, and I sat there, and they deliberated and they talked, and the Historic Resource Commission unanimously denied the project.
Wow.
Yeah, well, it was the big wow was that my boss at the time, who was the director of facility services, was one who was instrumental in having the campus master plan approved, but also instrumental in forming that historic district. And at the time, it was conveyed as there would be some benefits because we would maybe get some grant funding to do some projects and stuff like that. The flip side of that we might not be able to build buildings because of it, was not something that was pitched at the time it was established. So he was suddenly on the hot seat, and he's like, we got to do something here to get this thing approved. So our option was to appeal it to the city council. And so he knew my experience, and so he said, Dave, take the baton, this is in your lap, you gotta make this work for us. I'm like, okay. So I thought about it for the weekend,
Okay.
and I came back and I said, okay, there were issues that I'd heard at the meeting and all, and I said, well, the building's got to move 25 feet. I don't care how we do it, we got to move the building off the street. It's too close to the street. There were some issues with the parapets and some other things and entrances on the buildings and how those were defined and all that. Had a laundry list of stuff. I said, here's what we got to do to get the vote that we need at the council. So we packaged up a revised application, submitted to the city. There was, at the time, Dan Brown, who's still on city council, was still adamantly opposed to the building the way it was. And so even at the city council hearing, he had put together like a 3 or 4 page testimony himself about why the project shouldn't get approved. And the initial motion at the city council hearing was to deny the project. And there was a vote, and it didn't pass 5-4. And so then there was some other discussion, and there was a motion to approve it, and it got approved 5-4. But I mean, I consider that luck. Sometimes it's business, but a lot of times it's luck. And so we did get it approved, And that was good. It's always nice to, to feel good that you're advocating and supporting, the institution you work for. But more importantly, about a month later, there was the groundbreaking ceremony. And Linus Pauling Jr. Attended, and I was fortunate enough to actually have lunch with him that day. And at the groundbreaking ceremony, what was said is that if it weren't for this institution being here, he said we wouldn't be developing these vaccines and these solutions to some of the things that don't allow people to live a full life, whether it's cancer or whatever kind of disease they're struggling with. And when I heard that, I realized, well, that's the important thing. That's what I can really feel good about my contribution to promoting and encouraging that, allowing that to occur. For other people, the historic district and land use stuff actually just goes out the window when other things like that come up. And about, I don't know how many years, it was maybe a year or two after that, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer myself. And so I was fortunate to get it when I did, because they had some technologies and I was able to go through chemo and radiation and surgery and whatever else, and I'm here today. So anyways, it was an interesting project. I'm glad it's there, and there's a lot of good work being done. Actually, a lot of good work in general on campus. People don't know the amount of research and findings and what's happening on campus. It's fascinating when you get into the bowels of what people are doing and what they're studying and just their passions about stuff. It's really interesting over there.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Lee.
All right. If anybody wants to ask Dave any other questions while we hang on a little bit, you're more than welcome to.